January 30th, 1945, 1940 hours. Captain Juan Pota crouched behind the wooden supports of the Cabu River Bridge in WWII, Philippines, observing 1,000 Japanese troops assembling for evening roll call on the opposite bank. Behind him, 200 Filipino guerrillas were concealed along the riverbank, ready to fire. In half an hour, American Rangers would strike a prisoner-of-war camp 800 yards to the south. If these 1,000 Japanese soldiers crossed this bridge, every Ranger and every prisoner would be lost. Pota had battled the Japanese for 3 years. He understood their strategies, their weapons, and the way they thought. He also understood the harsh math of what he was about to attempt. 200 guerrillas against 1,000 trained infantrymen backed by armored tanks. The numbers predicted defeat. They suggested his men would break and flee within minutes. They implied the bridge would be overrun with enemy reinforcements before the Rangers could rescue a single prisoner. But Pota had advantages the numbers couldn't measure. The bridge was wired with explosives, forming a V-shaped choke point, with 25 landmines hidden along the approach. Machine guns were placed to create overlapping fields of fire, and he commanded men who had witnessed the Japanese slaughter, starve and torture their fellow countrymen for 3 years, men who would die rather than let the enemy cross. What unfolded in the next 45 minutes became one of the most lopsided defensive battles in the Pacific War. Against staggering odds, Pota and his guerrillas killed over 400 Japanese soldiers while losing just 21 of their own. They destroyed tanks, crushed flanking attacks, and held the bridge long enough for the Rangers to complete their mission. The entire operation hinged on a decision Pota had made 3 days earlier, a choice grounded not in firepower, but in understanding what the enemy could not anticipate. The first American prisoner at Cabanatuan was Sergeant James Baldassari, captured at Bataan on April 9, 1942. Baldassari had served as a supply clerk with the 31st Infantry Regiment. He witnessed Japanese bombers obliterate his unit's equipment and saw his commanders surrender before embarking on what prisoners would later call the Bataan Death March, 65 miles over 5 to 10 days. There was no food, no water. Men who fell were bayoneted where they lay. Those who begged for water were shot. Soldiers who aided comrades were beaten to death. Of the 76,000 men who began the march, fewer than 54,000 survived to reach Camp O'Donnell. Baldassari survived, but the ordeal left him emaciated. He weighed 170 pounds when he surrendered, 112 pounds upon arrival at O'Donnell, and just 94 pounds 3 months later when transferred to Cabanatuan. At Cabanatuan, prisoners received 2 meager meals daily: rice diluted with water, occasionally mixed with weevils or unidentifiable decayed vegetables, barely enough to sustain men performing grueling labor in tropical heat. The camp's Japanese commander, Lieutenant Colonel Shigji Mori, believed surrender was the ultimate dishonor. Prisoners who capitulated deserved no mercy, no compassion, and no humanity beyond what was required to extract labor. His orders were explicit: work them to death. If they couldn't, accelerate their demise. By the end of 1942, 2,642 Americans had died at Cabanatuan, mostly from disease: dysentery, malaria, beriberi, dengue fever, illnesses that would have been treatable anywhere else but were fatal here due to the absence of medicine. The Japanese forbade prisoners from receiving aid from outside sources. Baldassari watched men perish beside him in the barracks. He saw them die in the latrines, too weak to stand. He saw them collapse during morning formations. Week by week, burial details grew larger. At its peak, the camp encompassed 3 separate compounds. Camp 1 held the sick and disabled. Camp 2 housed healthier prisoners assigned to work details. Camp 3 served as a transient facility. By 1944, only Camp 1 remained operational, its population reduced by death and transfer to other locations. Prisoners organized secret resistance despite the risks. Some built hidden radios from SERs, carefully dismantling and hiding components during Japanese inspections. Others established smuggling networks with Filipino civilians who risked execution to provide medicine and food. A few prisoners maintained detailed records of Japanese atrocities, hiding documents in latrines and buried containers, determined that someone survived to tell what happened. The Filipino underground proved essential top-prisoner survival. Led by people like Margaret Utinsky and Naomi Flores, Filipino civilians smuggled thousands of quinine tablets into the camp, saving hundreds of lives from malaria. They passed messages between prisoners and their families, providing evidence that the outside world had not forgotten them. Some paid with their lives when Japanese authorities discovered their activities. Work details varied in scope and brutality. The 500-acre camp farm grew food primarily for Japanese use, with prisoners receiving minimal portions. At the Cabanatuan Airport detail, men worked to repair and enlarge the runway for Japanese aircraft. Smaller details gathered firewood, dug latrines, prepared military defenses, and dug foxholes. Men too sick to work faced reduced rations, creating a death spiral where weakness led to starvation, whittled to death. Starting in 1942, the Japanese began shipping prisoners to their locations for forced labor. Thousands were transported to Japan, Formosa, Manchuria, and other occupied territories. Many died during transport when Allied submarines or aircraft attacked unmarked Japanese ships carrying prisoners. The Japanese refused to mark prison ships, resulting in tragic incidents where Allied forces unknowingly killed their own men. By mid-1943, more than half the original Cabanatuan prisoners were dead. The survivors had watched friends die of starvation, disease, random violence. They had watched Japanese guards execute men for stealing food, for talking back, for being too sick to work. The psychological toll was worse than the physical suffering. Some men simply stopped trying. They stopped eating what little food they received. They stopped getting up for formation. They lay in their bunks waiting to die. The other prisoners called it giving up. The camp doctors called it terminal despair. The Japanese called it acceptable. By December 1944, approximately 5 to 116 Americans remained alive at Cabanatuan. Most were too weak to walk without assistance. Many suffered from untreated tropical ulcers, gangrene infections that had progressed for months or years. The youngest prisoner was 20 years old. The oldest was 56. The average prisoner weighed less than 90 lb. The worst part was not knowing if anyone cared. The Japanese told prisoners daily that America had forgotten them, that their families believed them dead, that no one was coming to save them. Some prisoners believed it. They wrote letters that would never be sent. They made plans for after the war they would never see. They told themselves stories about rescue that seemed more desperate with each passing month. Then on December 14, 1944, something happened that confirmed their worst fears. The Palawan massacre occurred on December 14 on Palawan Island, 300 km south of Luzon. 150 American prisoners were held there in a camp similar to Cabanatuan. When American forces landed on nearby Muro, the Japanese camp commander received orders from Tokyo. Execute the prisoners. Leave no witnesses. The guards told prisoners there would be an air raid drill. They ordered everyone into covered trenches. Once the prisoners were inside, guards poured gasoline into the trenches and threw in lit torches. Men were burned alive. Those who tried to escape were machine-gunned or bayoneted. 11 men survived. They jumped into the ocean, swam to nearby cliffs, and hid until nightfall. Filipino guerrillas found them and smuggled them to American lines. Those survivors told their story to Army intelligence officers. The massacre reached 6th Army headquarters within 48 hours. General Walter Kruger understood the implications immediately. If the Japanese were executing prisoners on Palawan, they would execute prisoners everywhere. There were thousands of American prisoners in camps across the Philippines. Kruger needed to rescue them before the Japanese could carry out similar orders. Major Robert Lapam commanded Filipino guerrilla forces near Cabanatuan. Lapam was 28 years old from Iowa, fluent in Tagalog, and had been living behind Japanese lines for 3 years. His guerrillas controlled most of the rural areas around Cabanatuan. They knew every road, every village, every Japanese position. On January 26th, Lapam rode 30 men through Japanese territory to reach 6th Army headquarters. His horse was exhausted. Lapam had not slept in 2 days, but he had information that could not wait. Hemet with Colonel Horton White, 6th Army intelligence officer. Lapham spread a hand-drawn map on the table. He pointed to Cabanatuan and prison camp marked with a red circle. Approximately 500 American prisoners, Lapham said. 500 American prisoners, Lapham said. Most are survivors of Bataan and Corregidor. The Japanese have orders to execute them if American forces approach. There are about 200 guards in the camp. Another 1,000 soldiers bivouacked at Kabu Creek, less than a mile north of the compound. 1,000 more Japanese in Cabanatuan City, 4 pasmi south. The main highway in front of the camp is heavily trafficked with retreating Japanese units, tanks, trucks, entire battalions moving through daily. White listened without interrupting. When Lapham finished, White asked one question. Can they be rescued? Lapham said, yes, but it needs to happen immediately. Once American forces get closer, the Japanese will execute the prisoners rather than let them be liberated. White contacted Lieutenant Colonel Henry Mucci, commander of the 6th Ranger Battalion. The Rangers had been training for exactly this type of mission. Small unit operations, hit-and-run attacks, rescues behind enemy lines. Mucci had 121 men available. White told him to select his best company and prepare for a raid 30 miles behind Japanese lines. Mucci selected C Company and F Company. He also requested Alamo Scouts, elite reconnaissance units that specialized in intelligence gathering deep in enemy territory. 2 Alamo scout teams were assigned. Teams Nellist and Ransville, a combined force of 14 men, were the premier reconnaissance operatives in the Pacific Theater. The mission briefing took place on January 27th. Mucci laid out the plan. Rangers would sneak through Japanese positions, rendezvous with Filipino guerrillas, strike the prison camp at dusk, evacuate all captives, and return to friendly lines before Japanese reinforcements could react. The entire operation had to conclude within 12 hours. Any delay would leave them exposed in daylight alongside 500 weakened former prisoners, while Japanese units converged from multiple directions. The stakes were extreme. 30 miles behind enemy lines with no air support and minimal reinforcement. Failure meant the Rangers would be trapped, overwhelmed, and annihilated. Yet the alternative, allowing 500 Americans to be executed, was unacceptable. Mucci highlighted 3 non-negotiable objectives. First, absolute surprise. If the Japanese detected them approaching, the prisoners would be executed before the Rangers reached the camp. Second, flawless timing. Every unit, from blocking teams to assault squads to prisoner extraction, had to act simultaneously. Third, no prisoner left behind. Everyone had to be rescued, or no one would leave. The Rangers prepared with unwavering focus. Weapons were cleaned, ammunition double-checked, maps studied, and roles mentally rehearsed. Some wrote letters home, accepting the risk they might not survive. Others prayed, while a few sat in quiet contemplation, absorbing the enormity of what lay ahead. Captain Robert Prince would lead the assault. At 25 from Seattle, Prince was soft-spoken and methodical. His men called him cautious. Fellow officers called him meticulous. Mucci considered him the most tactically sound company commander in the battalion. Prince studied intelligence reports. The camp was surrounded by cleared fields to prevent escapes, guard towers on each corner, fenced perimeters, barracks for the Japanese troops, and transient quarters for passing units. Prisoner housing was in the northwest corner. The greatest danger was not the camp itself, but the 1,000 Japanese soldiers stationed at Kabu Creek, equipped with tanks, trucks, and heavy weapons. If they mobilized in response, the Rangers would be caught in the open with incapacitated prisoners. Prince required a blocking force capable of delaying 1,000 soldiers long enough for the rescue, someone to stop them from crossing the river. This is where Juan Pota came in. A veteran of the Japanese occupation since January 1942, Pota was 31 years old, a former Philippine scout trained at the Philippine Military Academy. After the fall of the Philippines, he refused to surrender, leading a guerrilla campaign that endured the entire war. By January 1945, he commanded roughly 250 guerrillas in the Cabanatuan region. Farmers, ex-soldiers, students, anyone willing to fight. For 3 years, they had ambushed Japanese convoys, severed supply lines, rescued downed American pilots, and gathered intelligence. On January 29th, Pota met with Muchi and Prince in Balankaran village. He brought detailed maps, sketches, and intelligence reports compiled over months of surveillance. He knew the camp better than the Rangers and was familiar with his own terrain. However, he raised concerns. The proposed attack that night would fail. The highway in front of the camp had been crowded all day with Japanese convoys, tanks, and troops moving north. An assault under these conditions would be noticed immediately. Furthermore, the 1,000 men at Kabu Creek were on alert, with increased patrols and defensive measures. An attack while they were vigilant would be suicidal. Muchi hesitated. Every day increased the risk to the prisoners. But Prince agreed with Pota. Waiting for better conditions might mean the difference between triumph and disaster. The strike was rescheduled for January 30th at dusk, giving Pota 24 hours to solve an almost impossible problem. How could 200 guerrillas hold off 1,000 trained infantry? Most commanders would have relied on superior firepower, but Pota understood psychology. He knew the Japanese had dominated for 3 years, expecting weaker forces to flee, confident in their ease of victory. Pota planned to exploit that arrogance. He arranged his men in a V-shaped line along the south bank of the Ko River, with the bridge serving as a choke point. Any advancing force would be funneled into concentrated crossfire. Machine guns were positioned at the V's apex, capable of sustained fire, creating a wall of bullets. 25 landmines were buried on the bridge approaches, designed to disrupt mass infantry assaults. Explosives were set under the bridge itself, to create an obstacle large enough to stop tanks and slow infantry. Most importantly, Pota stationed himself and his command where they could observe the battlefield, direct fire, call targets, and sustain morale as casualties occurred. Because there would be casualties. There was no scenario where 200 men could hold 1,000 without losses. On January 28th, the Rangers departed Guimber in trucks to the final American outpost, then moved on foot through Japanese territory under darkness, guided by Filipino guerrillas. Local villagers complied with operational security, keeping animals quiet and temporarily relocating near the planned route to avoid detection. Rangers moved in single file, equipment muffled, communicating silently, freezing when Japanese vehicles passed within yards. By the morning of January 30th, they began the final approach, crawling through rice paddies and irrigation ditches, advancing agonizingly slowly, covering 800 yards in 6 hours. Scouts Lieutenant Bill Nellis and Private First Class Rufo Vacula, disguised as Filipino farmers, reached a grass hut 300 yards from the camp and observed the compound for 2 hours. They mapped guard positions, shift patterns, prisoner barracks, and even a shed with 4 Japanese tanks. With their intelligence, Prince revised his plan. F Company, led by 2nd Lieutenant John Murphy, would strike the front gate and neutralize guard towers. C Company under Prince would attack the rear and secure the prisoners. The assault was set for exactly 1940 hours, coordinated with a P-61 Black Widow night fighter buzzing the camp to distract guards while Rangers maneuvered into position. At 1800 hours, Pota's guerrillas took positions at the bridge. Across the river, 1,000 Japanese soldiers finished evening formation, oblivious to the trap awaiting them. Pota checked his watch. 1910 hours, 30 minutes to the Ranger attack. His men were ready, machine guns loaded, mines armed, demolitions set. They waited. By 1930 hours, the P-61 approached from the south, its twin-engine roar carrying across the fields, drawing every guard's attention skyward. At 1940 hours, the first shots rang out from the camp. F Company had begun the assault. The sound was unmistakable. M19-19A, 4 machine guns, M1 rifles, the heavy thump of grenades. The attack had begun. Across the river, the Japanese camp erupted. Officers were shouting, men running for weapons, trucks starting. Pota could see them organizing, forming up, preparing to move. They would cross the bridge. They would reinforce the camp. They would kill every Ranger and every prisoner unless Pota stopped them. The first Japanese soldiers reached the bridge approach at 1942 hours. They were running. No tactical formation, just a mass charge toward the sound of gunfire. Potato waited. His men had orders to hold fire until the enemy was committed to the bridge approach. 50 Japanese soldiers were on the bridge when Pota gave the order. His guerrillas opened fire simultaneously, machine guns and nearly 200 rifles firing into a concentrated area. The effect was devastating. The bridge approach became a killing zone. Japanese soldiers fell in clusters. Those behind them tried to retreat, but more soldiers were pushing forward. The bridge became choked with bodies. 1944 hours. Pota detonated the charges under the bridge. The explosion created a large hole in the structure, not enough to stop infantry, but enough that vehicles could not cross. A Japanese tank attempted to cross anyway. It fell into the hole and blocked the bridge completely. More Japanese soldiers were charging. Pota could see officers trying to organize them, trying to form proper assault lines, but the V-shaped defensive position caught them in a crossfire. Every approach was covered. Machine gun fire swept across the riverbank. Rifles picked off officers. The Japanese were taking horrific casualties and gaining no ground. 1946 hours. Pota saw Japanese soldiers attempting to flank his position. They were moving downstream, trying to cross the river away from the bridge. Pota had anticipated this. He'd positioned a reserve squad with orders to watch the flanks. They engaged the flanking force. Within minutes, the flanking attempt was annihilated. Bodies floated downstream in the current. The Japanese tried again. Another mass charge at the bridge. This time, they brought forward a second tank. The tank fired its main gun at the guerrilla positions. The round exploded near one of the machine gun nests, killing 2 guerrillas and wounding 3 more. A guerrilla with a bazooka, trained only that morning by rangers, stood up with the weapon. He had never fired it in combat. The tank was 200 wide away, moving, partially obscured by smoke. Hamed breathed out and fired. The bazooka round struck the tank's front armor and penetrated. The tank stopped, hatches flew open. Crew evacuated. Before they could reach cover, rifle fire cut them down. The same guerrilla reloaded and destroyed 3 more tanks attempting to cross. 4 Japanese tanks destroyed by a fighter who had learned to use the weapon that morning. 1950 hours. The Japanese stopped charging. Pota could see them reorganizing, pulling back, establishing defensive positions on their side of the river. They had taken massive casualties, lost their tanks, and failed to cross the bridge. For the moment, the attack was paused, but Pota knew they would try again. Japanese infantry doctrine emphasized aggressive assault. They would regroup and charge again and again until either the bridge fell or they ran out of men. 1952 hours the Japanese charged for the 3rd time. This assault was better organized. They used smoke grenades for concealment. They concentrated fire on the machine gun positions to suppress the guerrillas. They advanced in proper fire and maneuver teams, some shooting while others moved. It was the most dangerous moment of the engagement. Potato's men were taking sustained fire. Casualties were mounting. The Toding Rivering. Machine gun positions were under constant bombardment. If one of those guns went silent, the entire defensive line could collapse. But the guerrillas held. They had personal stakes in this fight that went beyond tactics or duty. Many had family members who died at Japanese hands. Many had spent 3 years watching their country occupied. Their people starved, their culture suppressed. This bridge was more than a military objective. It was revenge, justice, liberation, all concentrated into a few square yards of ground they would not surrender. 1958 hours. Pota saw a red flare rise from the prison camp. That was Prince's signal. The Rangers had evacuated all prisoners. They were moving toward the Pampanga River rendezvous point. The mission was complete. But Pota could not withdraw yet. The prisoners were still within range. If Japanese forces crossed the bridge now, they could intercept the evacuation. Pota needed to hold for at least 10 more minutes. 2,000 hours. Another Japanese charge. This one was desperate, suicidal. They knew the prisoners were escaping. They knew reinforcements would arrive too late. This was their last chance to salvage something from the disaster. They charged straight into the machine gun fire. No cover, no concealment, just running directly at the bridge. Dozens fell, then dozens more. The machine guns were overheating, barrels glowing red from sustained fire. Guerrillas were pouring water on them to cool them down while continuing to fire. 202 hours the charge broke. The surviving Japanese soldiers retreated. They had lost more than half their force trying to cross that bridge. Their officers were dead or wounded. Their tanks were destroyed. Their morale was shattered. 205 hours. Prince fired a second red flare. That was the signal for Pota to withdraw. The prisoners were across the Pampanga River. They were safe. Pota gave the order. His guerrilla spooled back by squads covering each other's retreat. They moved quickly through pre-planned withdrawal routes. Behind them, the bridge was littered with Japanese dead. Pota estimated more than 400 enemy killed. His guerrillas had suffered 21 killed and approximately 30 wounded, against 1,000 attackers supported by armor. His 200 men had held that bridge for 25 minutes and inflicted a casualty ratio of more than 15 to 1. But Pota had no time to count bodies or assess damage. His guerrillas had to reach the rendezvous point, help evacuate prisoners, and get everyone across the Pampanga before dawn. Japanese forces were converging on the area. If they were caught in daylight, the entire rescue would be lost. The Rangers had needed 30 minutes to assault the camp, evacuate 516 prisoners, and move to Thariver. Pota had given them 30 minutes. Not 35, not 25. Exactly 30 minutes, because that was what the mission required. And Pota understood that in this type of operation, timing mattered more than firepower. At the prison camp, Prince's assault had gone nearly perfectly. The P-61 distraction had worked. Japanese guards had been staring at the sky when Rangers opened fire. Within 15 seconds, every guard tower and pillbox had been neutralized. F Company blew the main gate lock with a .45 caliber pistol and poured into the compound. The Japanese guards retreated to their barracks and attempted to organize a defense. They never had the chance. Rangers cleared the barracks with grenades and rifle fire. Resistance collapsed within minutes. The camp was secure. Inside the prisoner barracks, men reacted with confusion and disbelief. Some thought it was a Japanese trick. Others believed they were hallucinating from fever and malnutrition. Rangers had to convince prisoners that the rescue was real, that Americans had come for them, that they were finally going home. Some prisoners wept. Others laughed hysterically. A few were too weak to react at all. Rangers found men who weighed less than 80 lb, barely alive, unable to comprehend what was happening. Medical personnel quickly assessed who could walk and who needed immediate carrying. The evacuation revealed the full extent of prisoners' suffering. Men had tropical ulcers that exposed bone. Others had untreated fractures that had healed incorrectly. Many were blind from vitamin deficiencies. Some had lost the ability to speak from prolonged isolation. The Rangers saw firsthand what 3 years of Japanese captivity had done to American soldiers. One prisoner, a colonel who'd commanded thousands of men before Bataan, weighed 79 lbs and could barely whisper. Another, a former athlete, had legs so thin that Rangers feared they would break if lifted incorrectly. These were not the vigorous young men who had deployed to the Philippines in 1941. These were broken survivors who had endured hell. But then Prince encountered a problem he had not fully anticipated. The prisoners were in worse condition than intelligence had suggested. Many could not walk. Some could not stand. They had been starving for 3 years, and the sudden excitement of rescue was causing medical emergencies. Several prisoners were having heart attacks from shock and stress. Prince ordered his men to carry everyone who could not walk. If necessary, carry 2 men per ranger. No one gets left behind. That had been Muchi's order, and Prince would execute it regardless of how difficult it made the evacuation. Rangers hoisted prisoners onto their backs and began moving toward the gate. Some prisoners weighed less than 90 Rangers could carry them easily. Other prisoners were in such poor condition that Rangers had to fashion litters from bamboo and cloth. One prisoner died of a heart attack as a ranger carried him through the gate. He had survived 3 years of captivity, survived disease and starvation and torture, and died 100th from freedom. The ranger who had been carrying him wept openly but kept moving. There were 515 other men who needed to get out. By 200 hours, every living prisoner was out of the camp. Prince formed them into a column with rangers providing security on all sides. They moved as quickly as the prisoners could manage, which was not fast enough. Japanese reinforcements were coming from Cabanatuan City. If they did not reach the Pampanga River within the hour, they would be caught. Local Filipino villagers had organized a caravan of carabao carts, water buffalo-drawn wagons used for transporting rice and goods. Captain Pota had arranged for these carts days earlier. There were supposed to be 26 carts. By the time the column reached the river, there were over 100. Villagers from every nearby barangay had brought their carts, their animals, their children to help evacuate the prisoners. The prisoners were loaded into carts. Those who could walk were helped across the river on foot. The evacuation became a community effort. Filipino civilians risked their lives to help men they had never met. Men from a country thousands of miles away, simply because it was the right thing to do. By midnight, the entire force was across the Pampanga. Prince sent word to 6th Army headquarters. Mission successful. Orders. Mission successful. 516 prisoners liberated, 2 rangers killed, 4 wounded. Estimated 500 to 1,000 Japanese casualties. General Walter Kruger received the message at 0100 hours on January 31st. He immediately ordered a cordon of American forces to move forward and secure the evacuation route. By dawn, the rescued prisoners were behind American lines. 3 years of captivity were over. The 2 rangers killed were Captain James Fisher, the battalion surgeon, who was mortally wounded by Japanese mortar fire and died January 31st, saying his last words were about the prisoners, and Corporal Roy, who was struck by friendly fire from a nervous ranger after the assault ended. 21 Filipino guerrillas diadat the Caru River Bridge, holding their positions against impossible odds. Their sacrifice made the rescue possible. The Japanese reaction was confusion and rage. Senior officers could not understand how such a small American force had penetrated 30 minutes behind their lines, destroyed a camp, and evacuated hundreds of prisoners. They suspected betrayal by local Filipinos, which was accurate but unhelpful. The damage was done. More concerning was the engagement at the Cabu River Bridge. Japanese commanders reviewing the battlefield found over 400 dead, multiple destroyed tanks, and evidence of a well-executed defensive action. The after-action report struggled to explain how guerrillas had inflicted such casualties. Official Japanese Army doctrine said guerrillas were inferior fighters who would break under sustained attack. This engagement proved otherwise. The tactical implications were significant. If Filipino guerrillas could hold defensive positions against superior numbers, then Japanese forces could not assume easy victory in future engagements. Every bridge, every road, every village could potentially become a killing zone. That uncertainty eroded Japanese confidence and forced them to commit more troops to rear area security, troops desperately needed at the front lines. The rescue had broader strategic impact. American forces conducted 4 more prison camp raids in the following month using similar tactics. Rangers or scouts for assault, Filipino guerrillas for blocking positions, local civilians for evacuation support. Those raids rescued over 7,000 prisoners total. For the prisoners, return to American lines meant medical treatment, real food, and the slow process of recovery. Many required hospitalization for months. Some never fully recovered from tropical diseases contracted in the camps, but they were alive, and that was more than any of them had expected a week earlier. Medical examinations documented systematic starvation and abuse. The average rescued prisoner weighed between 70 and 90 lb. Many suffered from beriberi, pellagra, scurvy, dysentery, and multiple parasitic infections simultaneously. Dental examinations revealed teeth lost to malnutrition. X-rays showed fractures that had never been set. The physical evidence supported war crimes charges. Prisoner testimonies provided detailed accounts of Japanese atrocities. They described the Bataan Death March with specifics, exact locations where men were bayoneted, names of Japanese officers who ordered executions, dates and details of specific incidents. They documented daily conditions at Cabanatuan, the starvation rations, the arbitrary beatings, the men worked to death, the sick left to die without medical care. These testimonies became critical evidence in war crimes prosecutions after the war. Several Japanese officers responsible for prisoner camps were tried and convicted, based on survivor accounts from Cabanatuan and other facilities. The rescued prisoners had kept their promise to document everything, and their records ensured accountability. The rescue also allowed families to learn what happened to loved ones who had died in captivity. Survivors carried messages from men who did not survive, final words for wives and children, details about how and where men died. For families who had received telegrams stating missing in action or presumed dead, these personal accounts provided closure that official records could not. Mucci and Prince received the Distinguished Service Cross for their leadership. All Rangers received Silver Stars or Bronze Stars. The 14 Alamo Scouts received Presidential Unit citations. General MacArthur personally presented awards on March 3, 1945, stating, "No incident of the campaign in the Pacific has given me such satisfaction as the release of the PWS at Cabanatuan. The mission was brilliantly successful." The Filipino guerrillas received Bronze Stars for their officers, but no formal recognition came for most participants. The United States government classified them as irregulars rather than official military units, creating legal complications regarding benefits and recognition. Juan Pota continued fighting until the Philippines were fully liberated in August 1945. After the war, he applied for American citizenship as recognition for his service during the raid. The application sat in bureaucracy for over 30 years. Pota traveled to the United States in 1976 to follow up on his application in person. He died of a heart attack on December 20, 1976, while waiting for the paperwork to be processed. His citizenship was approved 3 days after his death. That injustice reflects a larger pattern of neglect toward Filipino veterans. It was not until 2003 that the United States and Philippine governments established a joint commission to provide delayed recognition to surviving Filipino veterans. Juan Pota's family received his recognition posthumously at a ceremony in Manila in 2006, attended by American veterans who had been prisoners at Cabanatuan. The Cabanatuan raid succeeded because of combined arms operations, careful planning, Filipino intelligence networks, local civilian support, and a guerrilla commander, who understood that sometimes the best tactics come from understanding your enemy's psychology rather than matching their firepower. Potato did not win that bridge engagement because he had superior weapons or numbers. He won because he understood that Japanese infantry would charge repeatedly, that their tactical doctrine prioritized aggression over preservation of John of Jishan force, and that he could exploit that predictability. By creating a killing zone they would charge into, repeatedly until their force was destroyed. The raid is often analyzed in military studies as a prime example of special operations planning, highlighting the Rangers' training, the Alamo Scouts' reconnaissance, and the precise coordination of timing. Yet the most tactically innovative aspect was PJO's defensive strategy at the bridge, which is frequently overlooked despite being the crucial factor that prevented Japanese reinforcements from arriving. Contemporary military forces continue to examine the engagement as a model for leveraging advantages in challenging circumstances. The lessons remain relevant. Use terrain to amplify your combat power. Anticipate enemy behavior by understanding their doctrine. Position troops to establish overlapping fields of fire, and maintain morale through effective communication and shared purpose. The operation also underscores the necessity of collaboration across diverse units and cultures. The Rangers, Scouts, guerrillas, and local civilians all played indispensable roles. Remove any one element, and the mission might have failed. This interdependence is particularly notable in an era where individual heroism is often overstated. The raid also demonstrated the strategic value of unconventional forces. Filipino guerrillas, though not formal soldiers, lacked standard training, uniform equipment, and rigid command hierarchies, yet they proved highly effective. Their intimate knowledge of the terrain, intelligence networks, and operational flexibility often outmatched conventional units. American planners gained critical insights about working alongside indigenous forces. Local allies could provide expertise and capabilities that even elite U.S. units lacked. Insight into enemy movements, understanding of civilian populations, ability to operate covertly, and willingness to accept extreme risks for their own liberation. These lessons influenced future special operations doctrine. The raid also reshaped perspectives on prisoner rescues. Before Cabanatuan, military thinking deemed such operations behind enemy lines too hazardous during active combat. The success of this mission demonstrated that, with careful planning, intelligence, and local collaboration, such rescues were achievable. This emboldened military strategists to consider similar operations in subsequent conflicts. The psychological impact extended beyond the armed forces. The American public, demoralized by years of war and concerned about prisoners under Japanese control, found hope in the operation's success. The freed prisoners became symbols of American perseverance and resolve, while the Filipino guerrillas, though less publicly recognized, exemplified the bravery and loyalty of America's Pacific allies. This account focuses on Juan Pahota and the Kabu River Bridge, because that engagement, though often neglected, represented the most tactically demanding and decisive action of the entire mission. The full narrative also encompasses the Rangers' assault, the scouts' reconnaissance, the prisoners' survival, and the local civilians' assistance. Every component was essential. Lieutenant Colonel Shigi Jim Mori, the camp commander, faced a military tribunal in Yokohama in October-November 1947, where he was convicted of war crimes and sentenced to life imprisonment with hard labor. The tribunal spared him the death penalty due to orders issued from higher command. Colonel Robert Prince survived the war, returned to Washington State, and passed away in 2008 at 89. He never forgot PJO's pivotal role and consistently advocated for recognition of Filipino contributions. Sergeant James Baldassari, the supply clerk from the 31st Infantry who endured the death march and 3 years at Cabanatuan, returned home to a hero's reception he felt unworthy of. Like many survivors, he struggled with guilt over surviving when so many comrades perished. He dedicated years to corresponding with families of those who did not survive, ensuring their stories were preserved and remembered. Many freed prisoners faced long-term challenges reintegrating into civilian life. 3 years of starvation and abuse left lasting physical and psychological scars that 1945 medicine could not adequately treat. Some later exhibited what would now be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder, while others wrestled with survivor's guilt, questioning why they lived when friends had died. Physical recovery took months or even years, and for many, emotional healing never fully occurred. Annual reunions provided a supportive community for survivors to share memories, honor the fallen, and celebrate the Rangers and Filipino guerrillas who saved their lives. Over time, as participants dwindled, these gatherings became increasingly crucial for preserving memory and passing the story to younger generations. The liberated prisoners testified at war crimes trials, providing crucial evidence against Japanese officers responsible for atrocities. Their detailed accounts, corroborated by hidden documents and multiple witnesses, resulted in convictions and sentences. Some survivors found this process therapeutic, achieving a measure of justice for what had been done. Others found it reopened wounds they had tried to close. All recognized it as necessary to hold perpetrators accountable and establish historical record. As we remember the Cabanatuan raid 8 decades later, we should remember it accurately not as an American operation with Filipino assistance, but as a joint operation where Filipino forces played the decisive role in the most challenging engagement. Not as a rescue of helpless victims, but as liberation made possible by men who maintained hope through 3 years of captivity. Not as victory through superior firepower, but as success earned through superior planning, courage, and sacrifice by Americans, Filipinos, and civilians working together toward a common purpose.